After 1979, Israel and Iran became enemies. But they did not fight like ordinary enemies. Their rivalry moved through shadows, borders, intelligence rooms, and other people's wars. Words traveled first. Then money, weapons, fear, and influence followed. Israel watched Iran's revolution and saw a former partner becoming a distant threat. But before Iran could project power outward, it was pulled into a brutal war with Iraq. At the same time, Lebanon became the stage where Israel and Iran's paths would collide. The old cooperation was gone, but the new confrontation had not yet taken its final shape. The battlefield was no longer just geography. It was networks. This is the story of how the Israel-Iran rivalry became a shadow war. The revolution changed Iran's foreign policy, but revolutions also create vulnerability. A new state had to build institutions while defending its legitimacy.
Ordinary Iranians lived through uncertainty, hope, fear, and rapid change.
Ordinary Israelis heard a new language coming from Tehran, and it sounded threatening. The two countries were far apart, with many borders between them. That distance made direct war difficult, but indirect conflict possible. In Baghdad, Iraq's leadership watched revolutionary Iran and saw opportunity. Border disputes, oil, and regional ambition all fed the crisis. In September 1980, Iraq invaded Iran. The new Islamic Republic suddenly faced a war for survival. For ordinary Iranians, geopolitics became daily hardship. For Israel, the war created a strange calculation. For Iran was now hostile, but Iraq was also a dangerous regional power. Iraq had fought Israel before and supported enemies of Israel. The enemy of an enemy was not a friend, but it could become a calculation. This is where simple stories begin to fail. States often act on interests, even when their public language is hostile. Iran's war with Iraq shaped the early years of the Islamic Republic. What began as an invasion became a grinding war of endurance. Oil routes, refineries, and ports became part of the wider struggle. The war threatened the energy lifelines of the world. The United States, the Soviet Union, Arab states, and Europe all watched closely. The Israel-Iran rivalry was now inside a much larger Cold War landscape. In Iran, war strengthened the language of sacrifice and resistance. In Israel, attention increasingly turned north, toward Lebanon. Lebanon had already been torn by civil war since the mid-1970s. Its cities and communities became battlegrounds for local and regional powers. Southern Lebanon mattered deeply to Israel because it bordered northern Israeli towns. For civilians near the border, regional politics could become immediate fear. Palestine's Intifada. Palestinian armed groups had a strong presence in parts of Lebanon. Israel saw attacks from Lebanon as a direct threat to its civilians. In 1982, Israel chose a major military intervention in Lebanon. Israeli forces moved into southern Lebanon and pushed toward Beirut. The stated goal was security, but the consequences became much wider. Lebanese civilians lived between armies, militias, and foreign agendas. For Iran, Lebanon offered something important: a front near Israel. Iranian influence began to reach Lebanese Shiite communities and armed networks. Many Lebanese Shiites had long felt marginalized inside Lebanon's political system. War, occupation, and insecurity created fertile ground for new movements. Lebanon's politics were already divided by religion, class, and foreign influence. Out of this environment, Hezbollah began to emerge. Arms. It was both a militant organization and a political religious movement. Iran saw in it a way to pressure Israel without direct war. Israel saw it as a new and dangerous threat forming on its northern front. This was the logic of the shadow war. Iran did not need to send an army to Israel's border. It could build influence through allies, ideas, money, training, and weapons. Israel did not need to strike Tehran to feel Iranian pressure. It could feel that pressure from Lebanon. By 1982, two wars were reshaping the rivalry.
Iran was bleeding in one war while gaining influence in another arena.
Israel's security world became more complicated. For Lebanese civilians, these calculations were not abstract. Their homes became the ground where outside powers competed. Beirut itself became a city of lines, factions, and foreign pressure. Diplomacy struggled to control what militias, armies, and sponsors were doing. The region was no longer a single story. It was overlapping conflicts.
Four forces now collided.
Iran's revolution created a new ideological foreign policy. Iraq's invasion forced Iran into survival mode. Lebanon offered Iran a way to reach Israel indirectly. Israel saw new threats forming beyond the state system. Together, these forces created the early Shadow War. Iranian leaders used the language of resistance to define their regional role. Iran's revolution created a new ideological foreign policy. Israeli society heard Lebanon as a security emergency. Lebanese communities heard all sides, but lived with the consequences. Lebanese communities heard all sides, but lived with the consequences.
Is the growth. Iran's reach into Lebanon often depended on regional pathways and alliances.
The rivalry was becoming a network, not a straight line.
For Israel, every new connection created another layer of threat. For Iran, support for anti-Israel forces helped project revolutionary identity. Movements do not grow only from weapons. They grow from social conditions. Insecurity, occupation, poverty, and sectarian politics all mattered. This is why the Lebanese front was so difficult to understand. Official borders told only part of the truth. For Israeli civilians in the north, non-state threats felt very real. For Iranian families, the war with Iraq remained the central trauma.
The Iran-Iraq war became a war of exhaustion.
Both sides poured resources into a conflict that refused to end. Iran's revolutionary identity hardened under pressure. War turned ideology into sacrifice. Yet even while fighting Iraq, Iran kept building regional influence. Lebanon became the place where Iran could challenge Israel indirectly. Israel understood that the Northern Front was changing.
A new kind of conflict was forming.
It was not a conventional war between armies. It was a struggle through proxies, messages, pressure, and deniability.
Deniability became part of the strategy.
Iran could influence events without formally declaring war. Israel could respond without always confronting Iran directly. Lebanon became a mirror of regional conflict. Next, the conflict enters a more dangerous age. In a proxy war, power does not always move through official armies. Armed groups often build legitimacy through social services and identity. States respond through surveillance, deterrence, and force. Civilians are caught between both logics. In Iran, Israel became part of the revolutionary worldview. In Israel, Iran became part of the security imagination. Narratives began to harden. Each side used different words for the same expanding confrontation. From Tehran to Beirut to Israel's north, the rivalry moved closer. The conflict entered living rooms through television and radio. In Lebanon,
families learned to live with uncertainty. In Iran, the war with Iraq consumed a generation. By the mid-1980s, the war threatened global shipping and oil. The Iran-Iraq War had become a regional and international problem.
Great powers tried to manage the crisis while protecting their interests.
Israel continued to weigh which enemy was more dangerous at each moment. This is the core of the early shadow war: overlapping threats. Iran was fighting for survival against Iraq. At the same time, it was building influence near Israel.
Israel was trying to prevent attacks from the north.
Each action created a reaction. And every reaction made the rivalry harder to escape. Southern Lebanon became the place where strategy touched the ground. For Israel, the danger felt close.
For Iran, Lebanon offered reach beyond its borders.
Local conflict and regional rivalry became inseparable. Next, the conflict enters a more dangerous age.
Israel and Iran were no longer just enemies. They had become architects of a hidden regional war.
From the ashes of 1948, a new geopolitical landscape emerged. The struggle for dominance in the Persian Gulf defined this era.